Welcome back, part 29, and I'd like to just carry on with the concept of a hoax. And I just want to give a few other examples as to, why I feel that the Amityville horror should not fall into that category. Because, we've got very well-known things, online scams, con artists, who call up vulnerable people, they'll do it online, even door to door, and vulnerable people, are conned out of all their life savings, all their retirement funds, while someone runs away, sailing off into the sunset with their money. That is absolutely despicable and unacceptable, the kind of thing that does need to be brought to justice. It just does, because it is absolutely horrific. And then, we've got the ridiculous things that go around. Well, I say ridiculous, they're actually still quite despicable about famous people dying when they haven't. I mean, a few years ago, it got round that Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, had died, and it turned out to be absolute nonsense. Quite recently, I saw something that suggested Brad Pitt had died. It was nonsense. And a very recent one that I found particularly despicable was the lovely, legendary Dionne Warwick was said to have died, and it was untrue. And in her case, I found it particularly upsetting that, she is actually an elderly lady now. And people could have looked at that and thought, oh my God, she's gone. And found that very upsetting and disturbing, just to find out it's a sick prank. I mean, that is just terrible, And so this is why, I feel that, we ought to be looking at the Amityville horror in a different light, because this was never a proved hoax. It's not proved as anything, and yet we're still looking at a situation and well, more so a couple than the whole family, who do get demonized and incriminated as some kind of scammers and criminals, in some way, shape, or form, that I just feel is way over the top. I just feel it is, But then we're looking at the hoaxes that work in reverse. And there are a number of them, I mean, mentioning Geraldine Gates not so long back. I mean, she kind of really created or tried to create a hoax against them by talking about, oh, that $20,000 was all part of a scam. It was all part of the deal from day one. And actually, it doesn't take, much thought to look at it more realistically and say, well, that's ridiculous, that's ludicrous. They got the money from selling two houses. So why try to create some elaborate story and claim, that, is far more ridiculous than the idea of, them telling the truth, or at least, kind of the truth about, how they got the house. Yeah, so it all works in different directions. It just does. And this is why I say, there are hoaxes that are trying to prove that the story was a hoax. So it works both ways. It really does. And quite a lot, when we really start to sift through things. And this is why I always say there's always two sides to everything you look at. There's always going to be a flaw in something that you're looking at. You can't just say, well, that's there, so it's got to be true. I mean, nearly everything. And I will say it does work both ways. Yeah, of course it does. There's always something on the side of it being true that we could look at and say, well, that's not definite, is it? That can't be proved. That's not a solid fact and can't be. But as I say, it does work both ways. So we've never really got anyone who's coming along and saying this is definitely a hoax, a fake story, a work of fiction, a scam for profit. No one can actually say that as a fact. So just going back to the Kaplans, just very briefly here, because there was a point that Mrs. Kaplan tried to make in a documentary, a very well-known documentary made by the fabulous Daniel Farrens for the History Channel. And in this particular interview, she's talking about the incident with Father Peccoraro's car. And this was the well-known part that is in the book, and it is in the 1979 movie, where the hood of the car, or the bonnet, as we say in the UK, came up while the car was moving and hit the windshield, yeah? And her argument was, well, the car that was described in the book, would have had a hood or bonnet that opened the other way, so he couldn't have come back and hit the windshield. Yeah, absolutely fair comment. Yeah, of course it is. And it was also noted by Mrs. Kaplan that the the make of the car was changed in later prints of the book. Again, fair comment. Yeah. But again, this is where I say it's still not really proving anything, because I feel it would make more sense to actually try to ascertain proper information and get some kind of confirmation as to what car Father Pecoraro actually owned and drove at the time. Rather than say, well, this book says, and that book says, and this says, and the other says, and it doesn't add up. It's like, well, yeah, perhaps it doesn't, but I mean, we're looking at writers, not car experts, who, perhaps just, made a mistake there and, kind of thought, oh, damn it, I've put the wrong kind of car, I didn't realize that was the case, so I will change it. Yeah, I'll change it to something else, but it's all about looking at something that's been written rather than, kind of going to the heart of the matter and saying, well, let's find out what the real car was then. Yeah, you see what I'm saying here, so again, it's a lot of looking around the periphery. It's a lot of, kind of looking at details that came from someone else and not from the family themselves. And I wouldn't imagine that information came directly from the priest, that he would have, kind of got his own car wrong. Yeah, so, it's a lot of picking at details, really, that, as I say, it doesn't prove anything, it's kind of just, I'd say nitpicking, grasping at straws, splitting hairs. And it's all something that we can always look at and say, well, you haven't really got anything there, have you? Yeah, any more than, we have on the other side. So let's get rid of the smugness and the, kind of the smarminess, because all you're delivering here is a theory. You say, well, you know what, maybe this was made up because they kept getting the name of the car wrong. Not it's definitely wrong because we've noticed a few discrepancies. Yeah. So this is, it's one of many things that I just like to point out there, that what I've just said to you is, I'm not saying that I'm absolutely right. I'm not saying that it's an absolute given that they got it wrong and, that it wasn't, in the end, it wasn't true, but there are other ways to look at it rather than just taking someone's word for it. Yeah. So, yeah, as ever, that's what I like people to consider and look at. That's all I ask is let's always remember that there is more than one version of the story. And it can be absolutely amazing what we find out when we take the time to look at all angles. Yeah. So I'm going to leave this one here and carry on very shortly because, again, I want this to fit into nice bite-sized chunks. Okay, so I'll be back with you very soon. Thank you as ever, and many blessings.